Hello, and welcome to the Inside Java podcast, the podcast about everything Java, brought to you by the team at Oracle that builds Java. My name is Billy Korando, and on this episode of Input Output is a conversation I had with Danish Nawab that was recorded at JavaOne 2026 in March. Danish is a senior staff engineer at the rental car company SIXT. I first met Danish last year at JavaOne 2025, where he told me how his company was already running Java 24 in production, which was released just earlier that day. When I met Danish again at this year's JavaOne, and he mentioned how he was running Java 26 in production, I knew I needed to have a conversation with him about how his company was able to keep up with the 6-month Java release cadence. Enjoy the episode. You mentioned that you are heavily based on Java. So what current version of Java are you on and magnitude?
So at the moment, majority of our applications are on Java 25. Mm-hmm. And we are just on our way to Java 26, which has been released just a couple of days ago.
Yes. Yeah. So as of this recording, Java 26 was released on the 17th. And so part of the reason I wanted to talk with you is I also met you last year at JavaOne, and he had already moved to Java 24, and you already have moved some of your applications to Java 26. So that's very aggressive, and I love to hear it. So what made you convinced to kind of be able to do that rapid upgrading of your Java language or Java's applications?
Yeah. So I think we have to actually go back a little bit and look at the history of the company. So SIXT, which some of you might know, is the orange car rental company. And I think if you have been to the popular airports, you probably see our very cool advertisement. So the company overall is more than 100 years old at this point. It's a German-based company. And I think some of the early years were very turbulent for the company during essentially the two world wars that were going on in Europe, right? So I think we've been long enough in business, and we've survived a couple waves of disruptions. And one of the things that really has made SIXT into a powerful brand that it is today, where we are present in more than 100 countries around the world, is our usage of technology. And this started back in, 70s, 80s already. So there was some stuff written in COBOL, right? At some point, we went through a wave of modernization where a lot of our business applications were redone in PHP. And I think towards the end of late 2000s, the naught years, as well as early 2010s, we started to recognize this theme emerge of companies transitioning to cloud-native microservices. And we had some senior people brought in from our leadership, senior engineers, architects who looked at the landscape, and they decided that it's actually time to also invest in that. And this was actually around the time where we said, you know what, we're going to look at what are the different tech stacks that are available and what are going to be the tech stacks that power our software for the next, couple of decades.
And so you actually have adopted Java somewhat more recently.
Exactly.
It's not like you've been doing it since like the 90s or anything like that. Okay.
So I think this is where we differ a little bit from, let's say, the typical usage of Java that you hear from a lot of different companies. And at that point, basically, the architects, they looked at, or they decided on a criteria of what would a certain programming stack would need to meet for us to invest in it. And I think it was the standard stuff like it has to be non-proprietary, ideally open source. The performance has to be relatively good enough. It has to be resource efficient. It needs to be something beyond just an academic language. So we want to actually be able to leverage the ecosystem that already exists, hire people for it. And this is how they actually settled on Java as well as Golang, which I think has been the decision that a lot of other companies in that transition also moved. So this was now 10 years ago. And at this point, I would say most of our applications are split 50-50 between Go and Java on the microservice side. A little bit more on the Java side. So I would say it's maybe close to 60% on Java. And we are quite satisfied overall. And so we started with Java 8 actually at that time, which was, quite modern. And I think things were looking up for Java.
At the time, that would have been 10 years ago. That would have been 2016. So that would have been the most recent.
Exactly. It had even just come out. And there was a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about functional programming constructs that were being introduced. And we were riding that high for a little bit. And then, before you know it, Java 9 was around.
Yeah.
And we're like, all right, let's try to keep up, let's upgrade. But that was a bit of a disruptive change.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it has been discussed at length why that was the case. So I don't go into it. So we said, let's maybe checkpoint on Java 8 for now, and let's circle back to whenever it becomes a bit easier to upgrade. And around that time, the release model also changed to these 6-monthly cadence. And before you know it, 10, 11, 12, 13, and I remember just the Java versions running past by us. And this was around the time where some of the senior engineers, including me, we had this realization that we are just incurring tech debt if we don't try to keep up with Java, because and we also saw that actually in one of the presentations in JavaOne from Netflix, where they said, you have to treat it like ripping the Band-Aid at some point.
Yeah.
The longer you checkpoint on a certain version, the harder and more expensive the upgrades become.
Yeah.
So it actually started by just me having this thought that, let's see how far I can get on my own trying to upgrade one of my applications. So the good thing was that we already had the right platform and infrastructure in place, and also actually the teaming structure. So we practiced DevOps.
Okay.
The teams that build their software, they also run it. So we had a lot of freedom around how our builds would be configured, how we would package our applications and release them. And in doing so, I remember it was Java 14, and I was like, let's just try it. I started upgrading it, and or basically I just changed the compiler version to 14 and said, let's see what happens. And to be honest, the application compiled fine. The problems showed up at runtime, and they were mostly caused by third-party dependencies that also needed to be upgraded. Because they perhaps at that time were relying on some of the internals of the older versions of Java, which were no longer working on the newer versions. So it was actually quite a straightforward process. I just started looking at basically the SPOM that my application had, all of the dependencies that I had. And I said, what I'm going to do is the same way that I upgrade Java to the latest. I'm just going to upgrade all dependencies to the latest, and then let's see what happens. And this was now already, 6 years ago or so. So at that time, for the most part, it went well. I think there were a couple of dependencies that had some issues. And then I was able to also engage with the open source maintainers of those libraries, actually point out, help them out in this. I think they were also appreciative of the fact that somebody was trying that on modern Java versions. And they were able to very quickly patch and release. So we basically upgraded. We were able to upgrade to Java 14 after that. And within my team, I had a couple of microservices that I was able to quickly upgrade and deploy. And I think what was very encouraging was that I remember making this jump from 8 to 14, and I was looking at essentially the graphs, the Grafana dashboards that we had for our applications, and I was like, just by having done this activity, the CPU usage has really stabilized, and in some cases it has gone down. If I have to recall, maybe 10-15%. Memory usage has started to slow down. At that point, I wasn't really that aware of how the Java platform team was working and what were the improvements they were doing, because I was simply a consumer of the technology at the time. So I didn't know. But in hindsight, I, of course, understand now there's a lot of work that goes into hardening the JIT, right? Garbage collectors are improving every release. And I think this served as a very good data point that we could actually say, and you know what, we are paying, of course, for our cloud usage. And in the end, if we can start to shave a little bit of CPU here and there and stabilize our memory usage, and in all of that, essentially achieve reliable garbage collection performance, and we don't have to have those expensive stop-the-world garbage collections, then this is maybe worth pursuing.
So as my role, like one of the things I talk about often is like a new or upcoming version for Java. So I've been doing a lot of presentations already on Java 26. Usually the point where I make the switch is when we do the branching off the main line, or the first ramp down phase. But that's also what I talk about a lot with engineers. It's like a lot of them, now that Java 26 is just like the first release after a quote unquote LTS release, that, they'll get to it eventually. And for a lot of companies, it's like, oh, we just upgraded to Java 17. But you touched on one of the major benefits of continuing to update is that with every single release, there's going to be a number of performance benefits. Like some are very overt changes. Like there was a couple of updates to like G1 with this release that you might be gaining some benefits from, but there's often like smaller changes as well that come with that. So you kind of mentioned how back in Java 14, like you just like, let me just go for it, and you were able to, with a little bit of work, able to upgrade it. So how did you, maybe like once you did that, did you then go to your manager and say like, hey, we should try to do this for more of our applications? Like, how did that conversation go for that?
So actually, at the very beginning, we were able to avoid having that conversation at all, and that's simply because of the way our teams are structured. So, like I said, we basically had this idea: you build it, you run it. So we were able to just continue on down this path, just within a couple of teams in the beginning, who were quite eager to adapt. But I think this became one of those things which, once other teams within the organization started to realize the benefits. And I think here we also have to separate two different concerns. I think for a typical developer, they maybe don't care so much about 10% CPU usage. But I think what was really nice with Java 14 was all of a sudden we could use records and text blocks.
Yes.
So I think this was, of course, compared to where we stand now with 26, we've seen a lot more features. But I think those were the two features that were really like enough to get a lot of people hooked.
Yeah. Some features do come out kind of between the release, between like the LTS releases, like like that.
And for that reason, there was enough chatter around the water coolers about people discussing what features they have used or are looking forward to now using. And I think that really translated also to having a community within our company that would now then try to keep up, and they would actually read JAPs, right? That was not something that was happening to that degree before, just because I think there was a period of stagnancy that we saw with Java around the versions 6 and 7. And I think it needed a little bit of impetus for people to come back and start doing that. So I think this was having had this sort of community uptick really helped. And sooner or later, the managers also picked up on it. What realistically really drove us forward to then keep up with the version upgrades was better understanding of the licensing model, because, and I think you said this quote unquote LTS, right? The reality is that us, and I think a lot of other companies, they use the open source version of the JDK releases. So did we. And I think if you're doing that, there's actually no such thing as LTS, because you really need to have a commercial agreement with an entity to actually give you long-term support for something. Of course, there is the JDK updates project, and sometimes some bug fixes do make their way and trickle down to also the so-called open source versions of the LTS version. But I've always maintained that this is more or less relying on somebody's goodwill. So like essentially relying on some organization being charitable enough to contribute their bug fixes down to the main line. But I think as far as OpenJDK, the group works, they really just focus on one release at a time. So I think it was understanding, and also just realizing that there's not much point in giving up the gains that are coming from every 6 monthly release, as well as also just going back to what I said in terms of being able to not just checkpoint on something for a couple of years, then come back, which makes the release harder. And we actually saw that you can amortize the cost of such actions if you're doing that every 6 months. And that led to us doing it since Java 14. So we've done it, I don't know, we're going to do it for the 12th time now, I suppose. So that's a muscle that you can train over time, and you get good at it. I would say for the most part, the upgrades today are trivial and don't really cause that many issues. There were also some learnings along the way. I think we also found out that you have to be a bit more selective in the dependencies that you are using, because quite a lot of the issues that we faced were actually caused by a certain dependency which is not that well maintained, in the sense that the dependency doesn't really follow the so-called tip and tail model that has been recommended by the OpenJDK team. And we actually realized that, there are some of these dependencies that we need to move away from. We did that. And that made it relatively easy. And I think also with the ongoing work on having integrity by default, that really even should be chipping away at this problem even more so.
That's funny. Actually, just before this, Nikolai was having a conversation with Ron, who I don't think they covered integrity by default, but he's one of the ones leading that. I do kind of want to go back, though. So you said the first time you attempted this was with Java 14. Now, by that point, were you guys already pretty mature on the DevOps maturity scale, or what did you kind of have to do? Because also one of the things I kind of talk about with this is that obviously by upgrading with every JDK, you get some of those immediate benefits from the work that's being done. But I also feel like that's a relatively small thing. A lot of the real benefit comes from being able to continually update your applications and being able to take in like all those underlying dependencies. So so back in JDK when you first did this, were you guys already pretty mature? And then like, yeah, some of the lessons you learned and how did you get to that maturity to where you're able to push out new versions so quickly?
Yeah, I think we were on that journey towards maturity, and this has actually, in a way, turned into a very virtuous cycle. That once we started practicing this muscle by having to upgrade the JDK versions, we also got quite good at giving the same treatment to every other dependency that we have in our system, whether that's a dependency in the sense of a library or an infrastructure component. So just to give you an idea, at the moment, we invest quite heavily in making sure, first of all, at an application level, all your Maven or Gradle dependencies are up to date. We invest quite a lot in tools like Dependabot and so on. So essentially, you are getting weekly updates on all of your dependencies. And additionally, we also look very carefully at the infrastructure components. So for example, Postgres is the database technology that we use. And they have also actually, quite similar to Java, have really picked up the feature delivery over the last couple of years. And we've been able to also just benefit from that. So we I think 6 months or so, whenever the new Postgres version comes out, we're also keeping up with that. And I think this was a learning that we undertook overall as a company, not just the Java developers, but also the teams that were maintaining the platform and the build pipelines. And in fact, one thing that I have to address there is that once we did this update to Java 14, since we had this you build it, you run it mentality, we actually quite soon saw fragmentation where we had some services on 14, then eventually 15, 16, 17. So we had a couple of versions running in parallel. And this is where the build team came back and said, hey, guys, it's becoming a bit untenable and we need to actually settle on something. And this was around the time where we actually looked at what would be the version that we should settle at, if any. And going back to what I said, we didn't really want to checkpoint on an older version. So it actually just made sense to keep up with the new version, with the new JDK releases, which works also with the OpenJDK release model. And also, I think one of the things that was really helpful there was a couple of years ago, I think Spring also baselined on JDK 21, and we are big users of Spring.
I think that was 17.
17 perhaps, was it? Okay. And we had still quite a few services running on versions 8 and also basically pre-17. So we were really looking forward to that. And you're right, it was 17. The reason why we were so keen on 21 was eventually when virtual threads were introduced. So this was something that we were looking forward to. And that really made this calculus quite simple, that, hey, guys, we want to be able to benefit. Like I already said, we are using Go at the same time. And one of the strengths of Go was this lightweight concurrency model with Go routines. And when we had virtual threads on the horizon, it just made sense for us. So we started to get ready for that. And I would say since 21, we have actually baselined on just this idea that we have rolling upgrades every 6 months. And we don't entertain older versions. And in fact, we use that a little bit as a stick also. So if you miss a certain deadline to upgrade, your application wouldn't even build anymore because the older version of Java is just gone now.
Oh, wow.
So this was, we had to agree with, obviously, we had to have a community consensus within the company. But once this is there, it makes it easy and has enough incentive for people to try to keep up.
Yeah. So I imagine then like a big part of this, like one of the other talks that I really like to give is on automated testing. So I imagine like that is a really big part because as you're doing all these updates, you need to have like a really quality automated test suite. Like, are you involved in that process, or are you just like on the engineers to make sure that they're just adding automated tests as they're updating it?
Yeah, so the latter, essentially. We really encourage our teams to have this idea of engineering excellence. So invest quite a lot in automated testing, but this is not something that is done as a central service. But rather every team, every individual does that on their own level. And I think the teams that are the early adopters of a lot of technologies and are ahead of the curve they usually derive a lot of this confidence from a very strong test suite that they have.
Yeah.
In fact, I can also speak for myself. In a lot of my applications, it's as good as the fact that if the build is green, I can merge it. So I don't really have to do a lot of manual testing or something, because just the automated testing is good enough.
Yeah.
And that applies to dependency upgrades, that applies to JDK version upgrades. And this is how, for example, we were able to already do a couple of service upgrades to JDK 26 just a couple of days ago, just because everything was fine and,
Fantastic.
It works.
Yeah. And so, so one of the things you also talked about as you're increasing this maturity and being able to update with every 6 months is also kind of limiting what sort of dependencies that you were starting to accept. You had to make sure that they were well maintained. So what were some of those lessons learned, like, that you would maybe want to share with engineers listening to this, of what they need to think about as they want to maybe try to become more aggressive and kind of keeping up to date, like you guys have?
Yeah, so I think on that, the wisdom stays the same, that you probably want to use dependencies that are being regularly updated. And I think this is something that we now encourage our people to look at before they really decide to tie themselves down with a certain dependency. And of course, it's not the same treatment for every dependency. Some you might only use in passing, so it doesn't matter that much. You will be able to migrate off of it.
Yeah.
But there are some serious dependencies, and this is where, for example, we are very happy with the Spring framework because they really invest and make sure that they support all new Java versions.
Yeah.
Because if that wasn't the case, I would imagine that would be a serious blocker for a lot of companies being able to adapt. So even though I believe their current baseline, as you said, is 17, I think they still support, for example, virtual threads, which they have to do then at runtime by a reflection, but they're able to do that, and they really enable users to be able to leverage that. And in addition, I would simply say, be a bit more mindful of the dependencies that you take on, because I think this is generally a learning even outside of Java, that of course we use dependencies because they add value, but sometimes they can also be handcuffs later on down the road. So you really want to make sure that you see enough activity, you see how, for example, the maintainers respond to issue reports and so on. And I say that while being fully mindful of the fact that these are open source libraries, right? And we are indebted to a lot of these maintainers that are putting in that work. And I hope they keep doing that. But I think in some cases, we have seen a little bit more friction to the idea of supporting new Java versions. So within our context, it has now become clear that for a library like this, we need to migrate off of it.
So has that happened? Because, there's some projects out there that are very popular and they have a very dedicated, maybe a couple of engineers on it, but then, for some reason it no longer got to maintain. So have you had to make some sort of kind of sudden pivot for one of your underlying dependencies at some point, or?
Yeah, that's actually also an interesting story of using the latest JDKs. I believe it was JDK 24, which removed the security manager finally.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's still there, but it's permanently disabled.
It's disabled, right? Yes. And we had a certain dependency which was relying on the security manager internally.
Oh, yeah.
And I think they were a bit slow to respond to that. So there were issue reports because there was a gradual deprecation process. I believe it started a couple of releases earlier, then it was behind a feature flag first. So there were issue reports already from users that they wanted to get rid of that, or they would like to not have this dependency be a blocker anymore for version upgrades. But I think it sort of snuck up on a few people that all of a sudden it was disabled by default. And that led to essentially a slowed down, or rather a delayed release that would actually fix that. And that, in fact, was also fixed in the next major version and not the current minor version. And this was a popular dependency. I don't want to name it, but it was essentially even a transitive dependency via the Spring framework that was being used by the applications. And this led to the fact that, until Spring and other users catch up with the next major dependency, you wouldn't really be able to even proceed with the JDK upgrade, because then all of a sudden your application is broken. It so happened that JDK 24 also had the class file API, actually finally entering full availability. So what I was then able to do is actually, because we had this choice that could we actually fork that dependency and rip out the security manager features, which to be fair they had already done. So we would have just had to backport that to the previous minor release and be able to use that. But with forking and maintaining a fork, that's quite an expensive task because you need to keep up with upstream changes. And this was such a thin surface area that we needed to address that task was simply untenable. So what I did was that I used then the class file API. I wrote a small agent which would essentially capture the loading of those certain specific classes that were using subject and essentially just patch it, right? So not do that. Gotcha. So it was the fix that they actually did in the major version at compile time that we replicated at runtime via the new class file API. That's so that was a great success story. And that basically allowed us to proceed with the upgrade unimpeded. And this was something that could have been painful, but we were able to avoid that.
That's funny. That's a great and novel use of the class file API, because that is also going to be something that's going to be very nice going forward. Because like Spring, it uses like things like ByteBuddy a lot, which does like a lot of class code generation. And I know the maintainer of it, Raphael Winterhalter, hopefully pronouncing his name correctly, but I know he was also aggressive about supporting the class file API, and that's going to be, I imagine that's been probably helpful for you guys, like not necessarily always having to update a Byte version or your ByteBuddy dependency whenever like JDK 26 came out, because as long as there's not any API changes, is what they're depending on. No changes are needed. So no, that's really interesting.
I think ByteBuddy and some of the libraries that depend on it are actually example of that class of dependencies that I mentioned earlier are so great at keeping up with the latest changes and updates that they really make it easy for their users, and they actually never show up as a bottleneck for any upgrade. So kudos to those teams, and I hope others can do similar work.
Absolutely. So 26 didn't have a huge amount of new features, but like, are there any new features that are on the horizon that you're really looking forward to towards adopting for Java features?
So we would really like to see how this laden story unfolds, because we are in the end, like I said, cloud native in a cloud native environment.
I guess one feature that was part of Leiden was the ability to use AOT on any GC. Are you guys using GGC at SIXT at all?
Yes. So we still use the default, which in a lot of cases happens to be G1GC.
Yeah.
But there have been cases where we really needed low latency, and this is where we've used ZGC.
Yep.
I actually recently also saw this talk from Netflix where ZGC is now their default. So I'm really looking forward to actually try that out.
Nice.
Because in their experience, there was not a lot of penalty that they had to face. So in that case, why not? So this is something we're going to actually try out.
Interesting. And sorry, so I kind of diverted you, but yeah, are there any other features coming up in 27 or 28 or beyond that you're looking forward to?
Yeah. So I think with on the software development side of things, so writing code, I think this pattern matching story is evolving very nicely. In fact, we already have quite a lot of use cases of that. So for example, record sealed classes, right? And we want to see how this is strengthened further with constant patterns that unfortunately was again in preview.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that. And that's one thing. And then in addition to that, I think there has recently been a renewed proposal from Brian Goetz about the reconstruction side of the records. And that, in my experience, is a feature that is sorely needed at the moment.
Yeah.
I think it will be able to remove a lot of use cases that we have for certain, let's say, other code generating libraries. And we will be able to then use records in a lot more context than we currently do.
Yeah.
So this is something that we're quite excited about.
Yeah,
and last but not the least, the structured concurrency.
Yeah.
So we use virtual threads quite heavily already. And I think for the most part, that has really made it easy to build very scalable applications on the JVM without really having to invest in, let's say, some of the design patterns or libraries that have some other downsides. And I think structured concurrency will just elevate that to the next level and make it quite easy to write actually domain-specific multi-threaded code, I feel.
Yeah, no, that is a feature that I'm also really looking forward to, which is a bit weird because, so before I got into DevRel, my background probably isn't too different where I was working on a lot of web applications at various organizations I have been with. So like I've never necessarily done a lot of concurrent programming, but there have been a few times where I maybe needed to do that or wanted to, but it was just too difficult. But structured concurrency is going to be a very nice feature for writing concurrent code because like even right now, it's possible, but there's like a lot of issues where for debugging and then the overall structure of the code that is very difficult. So yeah, I'm also really looking forward to being able to talk about structured concurrency as an actual quote unquote final feature. So cool. Nice. So I guess maybe one last thing to kind of getting on wrapping it up, but so what advice maybe would you offer engineers for looking to adopt, your a very mature DevOps model, either, technical things to think about or maybe how to convince their managers to on why they should adopt it?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, at least I can speak for myself. I've always been very excited about trying new features that are coming out in Java or any other technology for that matter. And I often equate that because we are in the car rental business. So I often equate the fact that, if you had a choice that every 6 months you could get a new car, why would you stick to your old rusty car?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's sort of how I see it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, are starting to also wake up to this reality that, every 6 months you just get a nice set of features, hopefully, that you can actually use to write better code. And don't sleep on that. So this would be my advice. I think, obviously, in order to justify that to management, like I said, the runtime benefits are excellent. And a lot of those have been written down by some of the folks working on Hotspot in terms of the improvements on garbage collection. We had a talk about how JIT has improved or keeps improving, every release. So I think these are some of the things that can be used as data points to actually convince management. Hopefully that translates into direct savings to your cloud provider or however you run your applications. And I think the other thing simply is that you want to, like I said, amortize the cost of having to upgrades because that's just a reality of the software world. We are never going to have just the Java version or the whatever technology version, right? They are in constant evolution. And you can either get on with the program or you can lag behind. And in that case, every couple of years have this flag day or even weeks, right? Where you just stop working on everything else and you're like, we're just going to do the Java upgrade. Because I think that's counterintuitive. For us, we've managed to now get it to the point where it's actually literally a couple of lines that you change in your build file to get the new Java release. And honestly, it's a non-event. And I really encourage people, like I said, to just play around with it. If I understand that not a lot of companies will have this freedom of you build it, you run it. And they really are dependent on a certain central ops team. But in that case, what you could do nonetheless is at least locally install the JDK, play around with it, make sure your projects can build, or if there are any issues, start writing them down and start working towards that. And just start chipping away at this problem. Yeah,
or even, maybe try to work with that ops team just to have like maybe like a separate build that is then trying to build, on a future versions and see like, hey, it's working or there's only like a few minor changes. So,
and I also want to say that maybe it's not for everyone to perform upgrades every 6 months. But I think at least every couple of years, and if you want to settle on the so-called LTS releases, right, even though they are not necessarily special from OpenJDK's perspective, I think they do get a certain special treatment in the community. I think that's perfectly fine. But I think that should be the bare minimum that we're doing. If you're still using Java 8 or perhaps previous versions, I think it's a bit difficult to... You have a long road ahead of you, actually.
And it becomes then very, very expensive to do that upgrade process. Great.
And of course, not to forget that Java 8 is no longer even maintained on the open source tier, right? I think unless, of course, you're paying somebody, in that case, it's fine. But from my experience talking to many companies, they actually don't pay something and they still are under this false impression that this is okay.
That's very dangerous these days, or even many days or many years before as well.
And that is completely a topic of IT strategy. So please discuss it with your CTO, right? With your security team, because I think you can often use them to champion this idea of not running an old, outdated, potentially unmaintained piece of software.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And I hope you have a great rest of your JavaOne. It was great talking with you, Danish.
Likewise, Billy.
All right,
thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.